I pushed open the door, arms full of groceries, and froze. Just froze. There she was, my son's wife, standing in the middle of my living room like she owned the place, two giant suitcases at her feet, looking around my space like she was measuring it for new furniture. The grocery bags felt heavier in that moment, like they were filled with stones instead of the simple things I'd picked up for my quiet evening. Milk, bread, the good cheese I only buy for myself now. Small luxuries for a woman who spent 40 years buying generic everything so her son could have name brands. I set the bags down slowly, carefully, buying myself time to process what I was seeing. My hands were shaking, not from the weight, but from something deeper, something that had been building for years and was suddenly right there in my living room, unpacking itself without permission. Did you even ask who lives here before moving in? The words came out calmer than I felt. Decades of swallowing my feelings had taught me how to keep my voice steady, even when my heart was racing. Even when every instinct was screaming that this was wrong, so very wrong. She smiled, actually smiled, like nothing was happening, like standing in someone else's home with suitcases was the most natural thing in the world. Oh, Mother, it's just temporary. They're drilling next door to our apartment. The noise is just unbearable. You know how it is. She waved her hand dismissively, like my question was silly, like my space, my peace, my carefully constructed quiet life was just background noise to her convenience. Mother, she called me mother like we were close, like she hadn't spent the last 3 years avoiding family dinners and making excuses, like she hadn't rolled her eyes every time I tried to connect, every time I offered help or asked about their lives. I realized in that moment that David, my son, my baby, who I raised alone after his father decided fatherhood was too complicated, hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't given me so much as a heads up that my life was about to be invaded. The betrayal hit me like a physical thing, settling in my chest where it would stay for hours. Even my own son didn't warn me. The boy I worked double shifts for. The child I picked up from school every day, while other mothers had husbands to share the load. The teenager I drove to every practice, every game, every friend's house because I wanted him to have everything I never did. And this is how he repays that sacrifice, by treating my home like a hotel he can book for other people. I worked all my life for this quiet, saved every penny while he was growing up, so that someday, when he was launched into his own life, I could have peace, I could have space, I could finally stop being everything to everyone and just be myself in my own home. And suddenly, it wasn't mine anymore. I watched her unpack like she belonged here, watched her hang her coat in my closet, set her phone charger on my counter. Small invasions that felt enormous. Each item she placed was another piece of my sanctuary being claimed by someone who didn't ask, didn't care, didn't even seem to notice that this might not be okay. "It's only for a few days," she said, pulling toiletries from a bag. "Only for a few days." Like that made it acceptable. Like the length of the violation was the issue, and not the violation itself. "And how many days will it take to ask permission?" I heard myself say. The words surprised me. For so many years, I'd swallowed questions like that. Swallowed my needs, my boundaries, my right to have a say in my own life. But something was different now. Maybe it was seeing my toothbrush holder suddenly crowded with someone else's things. Maybe it was the way she'd already plugged in her laptop like she was setting up an office. Maybe it was just 40 years of disappearing finally catching up with me. I could feel decades of being overlooked rising in my throat. All those times I said yes when I meant no. All those times I smiled when I wanted to scream. All those times I made myself smaller so other people could be comfortable. I'd spent so many years being accommodating that people forgot I was a person with needs and preferences and the right to say no. This wasn't just about a few days. This was about every time someone assumed I'd be fine with whatever they decided. Every time my convenience was sacrificed for someone else's comfort. Every time I was treated like a resource instead of a human being. She was already making herself at home, completely oblivious to my growing anger. Or maybe not oblivious. Maybe just so accustomed to other people accommodating her that my discomfort didn't even register as real. I watched her arrange her things on my bathroom counter and thought about all the years I'd dreamed of this space being mine. Really mine, not shared, not invaded, not used as a way station for other people's problems, just mine. The calm before the storm, that's what this felt like. The moment before everything changed forever. I heard David's key in the lock and my heart sank. He walked in cheerful and clueless, grinning like he'd just solved everyone's problems instead of creating a massive one. You don't mind, right, Mom? We'll be quiet. Not a question, a statement, an assumption. The same assumption that had governed our relationship for years. That Mom doesn't mind. Mom will handle it. Mom will make it work. But I did mind. I minded so much that my chest felt tight and my hands were clenched into fists at my sides. I minded that my 43-year-old son still treated me like his personal problem solver instead of a woman with her own life. I minded that he'd given away my space without asking. I minded that he couldn't see how wrong this was. And in that moment, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I had taught him to treat me this way. Every time I said yes when I meant no, every time I prioritized his comfort over my own, every time I made his problems my responsibility, I was teaching him that my needs didn't matter. Quiet or not, this is my home, not a waiting room for other people's convenience. The words came out strong and clear, and I could see David's face change. Confusion first, then that wounded look he'd gotten so good at over the years. The look that said, "How could you be so unreasonable?" The look that had manipulated me into backing down 1,000 times before. But not today. Today, I was done disappearing. Mom, you've changed. You used to welcome everyone. His voice had that hurt little boy quality that used to make me immediately backtrack and apologize. Used to make me question whether I was being unreasonable, whether my feelings were valid, whether I had the right to want what I wanted. I didn't change, David. I just stopped disappearing. The truth of those words hit me as I said them. I hadn't changed. I just finally started being honest about who I'd always been underneath all that accommodation and self-sacrifice. I'd always wanted boundaries. I'd always needed space. I'd always deserved to be asked instead of told. I just stopped disappearing. God, how many years had I spent as a ghost in my own life? How many times had I faded into the background of other people's stories? How many dreams had I deferred? How many preferences had I swallowed? How many times had I said, "whatever you want," when I had strong opinions of my own? I worked double shifts when you were 8 so you could have new shoes for school. I drove 45 minutes each way to that soccer league because it was better than the local one. I slept on the couch for 6 months so you could have the bigger bedroom when you were a teenager. My voice was getting stronger, years of suppressed truth finally finding its way out. I said yes to every sleepover, every last-minute plan change, every friend who needed a place to stay. I said yes until I forgot how to say no. I said yes until I forgot I was allowed to say no. David was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language, like the concept of his mother having needs and limits was completely alien to him. And maybe it was. Maybe I'd been such a perfect accommodator that he'd never had to consider that I might want something different. His wife, I could see her watching from the kitchen, holding a mug of my coffee that she'd made without asking, offered to pay for utilities, $50, for completely upending my life, for taking over my space, for treating my home like a cheap hotel. She offered $50. I didn't even respond to that. What could I say? That my peace of mind was worth more than $50? That you can't pay someone to give up their sanctuary? That some things aren't for sale at any price? The silence stretched between us, heavy with decades of unspoken resentment. David was getting that defensive look he'd perfected as a teenager, the one that said everyone else was being unreasonable, and he was the victim. "We're family," he finally exploded, like that was supposed to end the conversation. Like being family meant I wasn't allowed to have boundaries or preferences or any needs that conflicted with his convenience. Family asks, family respects. I kept my voice steady, but inside I was screaming. Inside, I was that exhausted single mother who never got a break, who never got to just be tired without having to fix someone else's problem. Family. I'd given everything to family. I'd sacrificed my social life, my dating life, my career advancement, my dreams of travel. I'd made family my whole world, and somehow that meant family could take whatever they wanted from me without asking. David stormed out, slamming the door like he was 16 instead of 43. And I stood there in my invaded living room and quietly, methodically, began folding their clothes and placing them neatly by the door. Each item I folded was an act of reclamation. Each piece I placed in their suitcase was me taking back what was mine, my space, my peace, my right to say no. I wasn't angry as I packed their things. I was calm, determined, clear. For the first time in decades, I knew exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it. When I finished, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair. The chair I'd bought 3 years ago when David moved out. The first piece of furniture I'd ever chosen just for myself. Not because it was practical or durable or good for kids, just because I liked it. The house was quiet, really quiet, not the held breath quiet of people trying not to disturb each other, but the honest quiet of space that belongs to you and only you. For the first time in 40 years, my house sounded different, not empty, honest. I thought about Margaret, my friend who died 2 years ago. Margaret, who spent her last months in my kitchen, drinking coffee and dispensing wisdom I wasn't ready to hear. "Say no before life says it for you," she used to tell me. "Because eventually, if you don't protect your own boundaries, the universe will do it for you, and it won't be gentle about it." I cried then, not from regret, but from relief, from the overwhelming sense of finally coming home to myself, from the recognition of how long I'd been gone. I cried for all the years I'd spent as a supporting character in my own life, for all the dreams I'd put on hold that I was now too old to pursue, for all the energy I'd given away that I could never get back. But mostly, I cried from gratitude. Gratitude that it wasn't too late, that at 62, I could still learn to say no. I could still learn to take up space. I could still learn to matter in my own life. The next few days passed peacefully. David texted once, "We're back home. Hope you're okay." Such a careful message. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just hope that I was okay. Like my feelings were a weather system he had to wait out. I stared at that text for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to write a long explanation to help him understand why I'd reacted the way I did, to smooth things over and make it easier for everyone. But that would be disappearing again. That would be prioritizing his comfort over my truth. I am. Truly, I wrote back. And I was. For the first time in decades, I was truly okay. I thought about calling him, about trying to explain, about doing what I'd always done, managing his emotions and making everything okay. But why was it my job to make him comfortable with my boundaries? Why was it my responsibility to help him understand that I deserved to be asked before my life was rearranged? Those were lessons he needed to learn on his own. And maybe if I stopped teaching him that my needs didn't matter, he might actually start considering them. Being a mother doesn't mean giving up your life. It means teaching your child that love has boundaries too. I'd spent so many years believing that good mothers sacrifice everything, that love meant never saying no, that being a parent meant disappearing so your child could shine. But what had that taught him about relationships? What had that taught him about respect? What kind of partner would he be if he'd learned that the people who love you will always accommodate you, no matter what? Real love requires boundaries. Real respect requires the possibility of no. Real relationships require two people who both matter. I'd failed him by never teaching him those lessons. I'd failed myself by believing that my needs were less important than everyone else's comfort. But it wasn't too late. Not for either of us. I could still learn to matter. He could still learn to ask. We could still have a relationship built on mutual respect instead of my endless accommodation. It wouldn't be easy. 43 years of patterns don't change overnight. He might not understand for a long time. He might stay angry. He might decide that a mother with boundaries isn't worth the effort. But that would tell me something important too. It would tell me whether he loved me or just loved what I could do for him. And I was finally ready to know the difference. For years, I'd been afraid that setting boundaries would cost me relationships. What I was learning now is that boundaries don't cost you relationships. They show you which relationships were real in the first place. The people who truly love you will adjust to your boundaries. They might not like them at first, they might push back, but eventually they'll respect them because they respect you. The people who only loved what you could do for them will walk away, and that's not a loss, that's information. I sat in my quiet house, drinking tea from my favorite mug, and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not the exhausted peace of having finally met everyone else's needs, but the deep peace of being aligned with my own truth. My phone buzzed with a text from David's wife. Sorry if we overstepped. David said you seemed upset. Seemed upset. Not that I had every right to be upset. Not that they'd done something wrong. Just that I'd seemed upset, like it was my emotional problem instead of their boundary violation. I deleted the text without responding. I didn't owe her an explanation or an acceptance of her non-apology. I didn't owe anyone my emotional labor anymore. The sun was setting through my living room windows, casting everything in golden light. My space, my peace, my life finally lived on my own terms. I thought about all the women like me, who'd spent decades disappearing in the name of love, who'd given so much of themselves away that they'd forgotten who they were underneath all that service. It's never too late to come home to yourself. It's never too late to matter in your own life. It's never too late to say no. And sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do. For yourself and for the people who need to learn that you're not a resource to be used, but a person to be respected. I was done disappearing. I was done being taken for granted. I was done saying yes when I meant no. I was finally, truly, completely okay.